Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. A very, very warm welcome to all of you to today's webinar, Getting Past the Editor's Desk, which is hosted by the U21 Graduate Research in Education Community of Practice as part of our U21 PGR Success Series from Published to Funded. We have attendees joining us, even as I speak, from across the world, from Asia, from Europe, from Australia and New Zealand, and many other parts. So it is so amazing to have you all here. Thank you very much for giving us your time and for being part of this important conversation. Just before we begin, please make sure of these housekeeping notes. We do request you all to keep your microphones off because we would like to ensure that we can hear our speakers' voices quite clearly, and also the questions that will be asked would be saved for later on. You can have your videos on or off, that is totally up to you. And we definitely would like to hear your questions and hear from you. So please feel free to enter them in the chat. As you have questions as our speakers are talking, you can enter them in the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the session. Please also keep in mind that our session today is being recorded, and a link to this recording will be shared in a follow-up email later on. To get us started, please, if you could introduce yourself in the chat, if you could maybe share your name, your institution, one or two words that come to your mind when you think about our topic today, getting past the editor's desk. That would be amazing. It would be lovely to see where everyone else is joining us from. And while you do that, I would like to please introduce ourselves to you. The U21 Graduate Research and Education Community of Practice is an international group of graduate researchers from the Universitas 21 schools of education. Our goal here is to provide a space for postgraduate researchers to learn and collaborate and to navigate the challenges of higher education. You can find us on LinkedIn by scanning the QR code and stay updated on all of our future events. And this is our leadership team for 2026, representing 6 universities from the U21 network. We're guided by the vision to make this community of practice a space for professional, social, and scholarly growth for graduate researchers in education. And turning to the chat now, that's great to have people join us from University of Auckland as well, and from UQ School of Education from Queensland. Thank you. Hi, everybody. And thank you for introducing yourself in the chat. Lovely to have you. So to help us explore the publishing landscape today, what it looks like in 2026 and how graduate researchers can get started and continue in their publishing journey, we are very fortunate to have our panel of experts today who will be sharing their valuable insights and insider knowledge with us. I'll now hand over to my colleagues, and they will introduce our esteemed speakers to us. So Lorna, over to you.
Thanks, Sanskriti. I'd like to welcome Stewart Riddle. Stewart is a professor in the School of Education and Creative Arts at the University of Southern Queensland here in Australia. His research examines the democratisation of schooling systems, increasing access and equity in education, and how schooling can respond to critical social issues in complex contemporary times. Professor Riddle completed his term as Editor-in-Chief of the Australian Educational Researcher at the end of 2025, which I'm certain is a journal many of us would be very excited to publish in. We'd like to welcome you, Professor Riddle.
Thanks.
Now I'll hand over to Aaron. He will introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Lorna. Next, I would like to welcome Assistant Professor Daniel Fung from the University of Hong Kong. So Professor Fung's research mainly focused on listening strategies, vocabulary acquisition, as well as content and language integrated learning. So in today's discussion, he will share some useful insights from his extensive experience as both an author and reviewer in academic journals within language education. So thank you for joining us, Professor Fung. And over to you, Rabiel.
Yes, thanks everyone, and thanks Aaron for handing over the mic with me. Okay, and finally, we are joined by Associate Professor Obaid Hamid from the University of Queensland. His research focuses on the policy and practice of TESOL in developing societies. He is co-editor of Current Issues in Language Planning and a member of the editorial boards of Language Policy, TESOL Quarterly, World Englishes, Discourse Studies in the Cultural Politics of Education, English Teaching Practice and Critic, and Journal of Asia TFL. He co-edited Language and Sustainable Development in Bangladesh, Policies, Practices and Perceptions, that was published by Routledge in 2024, and he is currently working on a book tentatively titled English as a Southern Language, and which is scheduled to be published by Cambridge University Press. Thank you. And we would like to welcome Professor Hamid. Thank you for joining with us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So I'm just handing over to Lorna.
Thanks very much, and welcome to all of our speakers. The first question I will be posing is to Professor Riddle. This question relates to the publishing landscape in 2026. So we'd like to begin by really establishing what that looks like. Professor Riddle, since you've been heavily involved in the Australian Educational Researcher, I'm hoping that you could give us your thoughts on what the publishing landscape is like in educational research at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. That's a short question, but we could probably take this whole session just scratching the surface of that one. Thank you very much for having me along today. I'm really interested to listening to Obaid and Daniel's advice as well, because even though I've been in this game for a while, I'm still learning, and I think I'll kind of prove that in a minute. Just want to kind of start by acknowledging that I live and work on the lands of the Yagara, Yugara, and Yugarabal peoples, and to pay my respect to elders past and present. And I also want to just reference there's a storm coming over, like we're on the edge of it right now. And when I was looking at the meteorology, it looks like it's going to track straight over. So if I go a bit crazy, it's either me, my lack of caffeine, or the storm. So just to kind of put that in as a caveat in case things go a bit weird in a minute. So the question, thanks Lorna, about the publishing landscape in 2026. I got given that question about 5 minutes before we went live, and I've written down like 5 dot points here, which I reckon I could talk to for about an hour. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is, for me, kind of the scariest one. So AI. So the impacts of generative artificial intelligence in its different forms, we're only just beginning to see that play out in the world of publishing. And so as I was finishing my tenure at the Australian Educational Researcher last year, that journal is published by Springer, which is one of the big kind of academic publishers in the world. You might have heard of them, Springer Nature. And the publisher was sending lots of emails to editors of their various journals. They've got hundreds of journals. And the emails were getting increasingly frantic about what we needed to do as journal editors to manage the rapidly growing rate of papers being submitted to our journals that were using AI and not referencing it appropriately, or in some cases, papers being entirely written by AI, complete with reference lists that are just made up, all of those kinds of things. One of my colleagues at my university just this week shared with us a paper that was published in a journal using his name, his affiliation, so at my university, that he didn't write. And in fact, the paper was written by AI. And when he went into the reference list, it had citations of his that were not from papers he'd written, saying that he'd written this paper in a journal that he has now been trying for the last week to get a response from, saying, what the heck is this? And so I think, like, like I said, I could go on about this for the entire hour we've got, but I won't. I think AI is going to do some really interesting and terrifying things to the publishing landscape. One of the ones that we were really starting to notice last year were people that were reviewing using AI. And, the reviews would come back, and then if they got sent back to the author, if we didn't pick up that it was an AI generated one, then we'd get an angry email from the author going, what is this kind of stuff you're sending me? This isn't even relevant to my paper. It's just making stuff up. And an interesting thing about AI usage for reviewing papers is that the minute that a paper which is under review is plugged into an AI model, the copyright in that paper is now kind of shot because it's been sent off to whatever and they can do what they please with it. And so all of the journals and publishers are basically saying, don't use AI to do reviews because A, it's not actually academic labor if you're outsourcing that to a machine, but also it creates some really big problems in terms of the integrity of the research and how that kind of flows out into the system, which then turns into these kind of fake papers being generated. Now, I say that with the knowledge that as I was editing the journal that I had, wasn't actually that big of a problem. I think it's becoming a big problem, like as we speak. And so I think all of us are going to have to try and figure out how to navigate that. Like, I don't want to get too judgy on whether people are using it themselves with their writing, et cetera, but there's something I find really unsettling about the thought of an academic doing a literature review using AI to do that for them. And so bypassing that intellectual labor of actually engaging with the work of thinking through the ideas and letting Claude or ChatGPT or whoever it is, whatever it is, I should say, spit out some kind of summary for you and going, there's my lit review. Now I don't need to do one. To be kind of fair, I make the same argument at professors like myself who go off and employ research assistants to do a literature review for them. And then the professors publish papers with literature reviews that they haven't written, that they haven't read. I'm like, is it really any different? It's just instead of paying, in this case, probably a postgrad student to do it for them, you're just kind of outsourcing to AI. But at the end of the day, it's a question about academic labor, and it is a question for me too about academic integrity. And so that's my first big one. I think AI is going to cause all kinds of drama. The second big one, I think, is that you're entering an environment of academic publishing that has never been so hyperactive than what it is right now. Like the old publish or perish kind of days, I think are long gone. I think it's publish and perish. Because no matter how quickly you work to get stuff out there, it's never quite enough. I had, for folks who are in the Australian context, you might be familiar with the Australian Research Council has an early career researcher award that they're kind of phasing out, but it's called a DECRA, which is basically a fellowship for emerging researchers. So people who are within 5 years of their degree. And one of my very good friends is on the College of Experts that kind of oversees the process at the ARC. And she was telling me the other day that she's going through and reviewing these applications that are in the field of education. So we're not talking people in large science labs where there's 30 people on a paper every time a paper's published, and between the lab you can generate 100 papers in a year. We're not talking that kind of system. We're talking the kind of system that some of you would be used to, where you have 2, maybe 3 doctoral supervisors. The project you're doing may be within the bounds of a larger program of work, but often it's not. It's your own project and you're being supervised by folks. You might be doing it by publication. And in that case, there's an expectation that you're going to do changes with the unis, but it's usually 3. One of them's published and the other 2 are under review, etc. So if you kind of think the average education PhD candidate would be expected to do 3, maybe 4 if they're going by publication. There's no expectation that you produce any papers if you're going by a standard thesis, but you might produce one or two. Okay, so these people who are applying for this particular award at the moment, on average, have somewhere between 100 and 150 publications in the field of education. Now, I think I'm getting close to 100 myself, and I'm 14 years out of my PhD. And so, like, it horrifies me to think, how do you get, so, okay, maybe you did your PhD part-time, so you take six years, say, to do it, and you might be a machine, you're pumping out 5 papers. That's still 30 papers. Like, you're still, like, you've got to generate then 50 papers in the first 5 years of your career. It's bonkers. And so that kind of like accelerating hyperactivity, hyper performance stuff, I think is having a really pernicious effect on beginning researchers of like, before you've even had a chance to have a thought, to have an original concept and a, how might I put that into play? You've got the machine saying, well, where's your first 10 papers? And you're going, give me a minute. I want to actually work on ideas first. And then maybe I've got something to say. And so I feel really uncomfortable about that. And that's not even just a comment about emerging researchers. That's for all of us, because there's a real heightened sense of you just got to keep jumping on that machine, which takes you back to the comment about AI. You can kind of understand, right, why people are using it. Because if you can outsource all of that labor to a machine, maybe you can publish 20 papers a year without trouble. And so the final thing that I want to raise in the context, and I'm really sorry that none of these are positive. You probably should have given me the last question of how do you get past the editor's thing, because I would have given you nice things of how to impress an editor. But the third one is about reviewing. So one of the things that journals are really struggling with is getting reviewers. And it's because everybody is absolutely overwhelmed with all the work that they're doing. And so with a lot of new researchers, it's heavy teaching loads, it's large administrative loads, it's all this other stuff. And reviewing for a journal that doesn't pay you anything to do it and just expects that labor, and you get the email saying, hello, would you like to review this paper? It's going to take hours. We're going to pay you nothing, and you've got to get it back to us in the next couple of weeks. It's not a particularly appealing kind of prospect. But the problem that we've got is that at the same time that the number of paper submissions is going up, the number of people willing to do reviews is going down. And so to give you a couple of like very quick numbers, when I started work on the Australian Educational Researcher as an associate editor back in like 2016 or whatever it was, I joined the journal, we were getting about 100 to 150 papers a year. Last year, in my last year at running the journal, we had over 800 papers submitted to the journal. And so we're talking like 4 to 5 times as many papers are coming in. And most of them are of a decent quality because everybody's trying to get published. The number that we can publish isn't changing that much. It's gone up a little bit. But we invited last year 3,500 individuals to review for the journal. And of that 3,500, about half said yes. So we had about 1,600 to 1,700 agree to review. And so that's over like 800 papers and blah, 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 trying to get 2 people. So we were inviting 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 10 people to review a paper before we could get 2 reviewers. And so I think all these kind of things are crashing in terms of the publishing landscape at the same time. So the pressure to publish, the disincentive to review, and the pernicious effects of AI kind of washing through all of that, which I think make it really challenging. And I'm going to stop there so I don't take up more time.
Thank you so much, Stewart. That was so valuable. I think I wouldn't be worried at all about giving us what might, not be what you phrase as not so positive, because I think it's really important we understand what we are aspiring to. We understand the environment that we're within and the challenges that are present in there, so we can make better decisions for ourselves. Hopefully, maybe at the end, when there is that third question, you might want to jump in as well and give us some of your insight to that one. Thank you again. With that in mind, I'm going to I'm going to hand over to Aaron, and he can introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Lorna. So moving forward, I'd like to look at some practical issues or aspects surrounding manuscript preparation and submission with Professor Fung. So Professor Fung or Daniel, drawing on your extensive experience as an author and also a reviewer, how do you usually prepare a manuscript for publication? Or I should say, and how do you know when the paper is truly ready for submission?
Thank you, Aaron. And before I talk about this, I just want to give a very quick response to Professor Riddle's point. Actually, I just recently reviewed a paper that I found out was AI written. I mean, partly because of the language, but also because of the references that I happen to know about those authors. And then I was thinking, oh, hold on, did this author actually write a paper like that? And I tried to find out whether I missed a paper that is important, and I found that it is a make-up reference. Yeah. And then I actually wrote back to the editor saying that, well, I have a very high suspicion that this is like AI generated, and yeah, but I nevertheless I offered quite a lot of comments on how to improve, because I think the methodology, hopefully, it is something really conducted by the authors. But nevertheless, I could see the challenges. Just one more example, I was working with some collaborators, and then that collaborator told me she used AI to proofread. And then, because the problem is that when I read the manuscript, because we were writing together, and then when I read the paper, I found that the use of references was not very accurate. For example, like putting two sentences or clauses together and then bracketing several things. And then I realized, wait, hold on. This author didn't actually say all the things mentioned in this sentence. And I think it was partly because when you use AI to proofread, then you put two sentences together and then two references together. And then that would make an issue that actually not both authors said both things, but you just put them together and lump together everything. So I think there are challenges that we need to be very aware of, and yeah, about the use of AI. I personally haven't used it for writing or reviewing, so but I know that people are using, for example, even for proofreading, then there could be challenges. Yeah, just a quick response to that, because I see it as a very real problem when reviewing and also when writing with some collaborators. So sorry, Aaron, going back to your question, I think, yeah, when I prepare manuscript for publication. So I think let me go through the process. Okay, a typical procedure would be something like you conducted a research study, you wrote your manuscript, and then you submit it to an appropriate journal. And then the editor would read it and decide whether he or she would send out to reviewers to review, and then the reviewers come back in 2 to 6 months with a decision. Now, if I've just focused on the first three processes, like you conducted a research study, you wrote a manuscript, and then you submit it to a journal. Now, for me, I think, and some writers too, we sometimes identify a journal even before writing the full manuscript, because the reason for this is that every journal has their own scope, word limit, and also some preferred topics, right? So when writing a manuscript, I think one thing I would do is to think about the target audience of the journal. Yeah. So just as an example, I remember receiving a comments from journal editors when they returned the reviewers' comments to me, saying something like, to make the paper more relevant to the audience of the journal, then you should do this and that. Okay. So I think it would be helpful if you already have the target journal in mind quite early on. Yeah. Because I mean, again, every journal has their own preference of the scope, word limits, and topics. And I also had this experience some years ago. I drafted something without having any journal in mind yet. And then I realized when I started looking for the journal, then I realized, oh, wait, hold on. The journal has a word limit of 7,000 words, but I've written 9,000 words, for example. Then I need to cut, okay, back 2,000 words, which are actually very meaningful words, for example, okay, that I felt. So I think it would be helpful to think about the target journal and target audience in advance, if it is when we actually write or prepare manuscript. And in fact, I think in my context in Hong Kong, nowadays in a few major funding schemes, we need to talk about our deliverables when we apply for project funding. And then we are also advised to give examples of journals that we target. Okay, even in the proposal stage of a research, because you might have something in mind, you might have some great ideas, but you may be thinking, okay, how am I going to make an impact out of it, both in the academic world and also, of course, to the general public. And then we might need to give examples of what deliverables we have. And one of them, in terms of academic impact, would be to think about what journals I focus on. Yeah. So for me, myself, then usually I would think of a journal that is more related to, for example, applied linguistics or second language acquisition, and maybe the other is more about the scholarship of teaching. Yeah, so I sometimes think about whether my paper can be something a little bit more theoretical and one that is more like pedagogical, so to speak. Yeah. So going back to your question, Aaron, I think when preparing for manuscript, then I will ensure that the manuscript is relevant to the target audience of the journal. I would read the scope of the target journals in a very detailed manner. Like some journals may specify they just want English as a second or English as a foreign language learners or additional language. Some may mention that they focus more on the learner or the teacher. I remember I wrote an article submitting to a journal focusing on language teaching, but my data primarily comes from language learners. So I need to make sure that at least in the implication, I have something really strong to talk about how it implies pedagogically in like informing teaching and learning and the teacher, okay, what teachers can do, something like that. So I think it's really thinking about the target journal in advance. Yeah.
That's really insightful, Daniel. So I think time is quick running out, but are there any common mistakes or misconceptions that you think authors should avoid during, let's say, journal selection and manuscript submission?
I think I will try to make I'm sure Professor Riddle and Hamid has Professor Hamid have like more to share, but I think I'll just share one thing is like when I think about a common mistake, I would say that sometimes as a reviewer, I think I just accepted 5 more reviews last week, and then I'm now regretting. And then, but yeah, I've reviewed I think about 80 to 100 papers now. So I think one thing that I sometimes focus on is to see really this alignment of the paper with the journal like publication record. Although I probably this is the editor's work, but I sometimes also think about whether it fits into the journal. So just one example that I sometimes hear journal editors or other scholars talking about is that when they submit a paper to a journal, they make sure that their reference list at least includes something in that journal. Because I think if you feel that you could not include any references from that journal and you try to submit it to the journal, most likely it's either out of scope or it is not a topic that they are interested in. Even if it is a very new topic, then maybe you can think about whether it really gets to the target audience. So that's why I would probably include some up-to-date references and also think about whether the journal has published something similar before, and then or at least interested in this topic, then I would probably refer to them and see the connection of how my paper is aligned with the readership and authorship of those journals. So I think that is one thing that I tend to do nowadays to really see how my paper can be positioned within that journal and to the readership and authorship. Yeah. I think that is something I would remind myself often, and yeah, just something to share with you.
Mm-mm. Thank you so much. That's really useful and insightful. Thank you so much again, Daniel. So to take us into our final topic, I will hand things over to Rabio.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron, and thank you our participants who are really waiting to hear from our speakers. So, for our final discussion round, I think it would be really valuable to address some of the practical complexities around getting past the editor's desk. So, Professor Hamid, may I come to you on this point from your experience, as you know that, I mean, you are currently the editor of current issues in language planning. So, from your experience, how can graduate researchers in education improve their chances of getting past the editor's desk? So,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you very much, Rabil. I'm a co-editor in the journal that we have. I'm involved in current issues in language planning. We've got 3 co-editors, and we have executive editor. So yeah, I'm one of the co-editors. Before I start, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodianship of the land where the University of Queensland is located and where I'm speaking from. Well, yes, how to get past the editor's desk is a practical question. And I wish I could give some very practical tips or suggestions. But I must acknowledge that, what I will be telling you or sharing with you, how useful or how practical those tips will be, will depend. Okay, so yeah, I have to make that acknowledgement. But before I go into those practicalities, one thing that I must point out is something that Professor Riddle has already outlined for us, the publishing landscape. He's briefly referred to the political economy of knowledge and publishing. And I think that really needs to be emphasized when we talk about, getting past the editor's desk with our submission. Particularly, we have to understand the role of labor, intellectual labor, and how this labor is valued, and so on and so forth. So I think we have to understand all these things when we think about these practical questions. And so the way you have framed this idea, getting past the editor's desk, I think this is an euphemistic expression. So we can call it, getting rid of, or how we can avoid rejection or desk rejection. And so this is sort of, rejection is very, very common. And maybe I can share with you my first experience of trying to publish something that was a long time ago, around 2003, 2004, even before I started my PhD. So I'm originally from Bangladesh, and I was working at the University of Dhaka at that time. And at the time, I did an interesting research project and wrote an article, and I thought it was interesting. But of course, I had very limited experience of publishing. No connections, no knowledge. And in those days, when you were submitting something, you have to mail hard copies to the journal office, so on and so forth. So I ended up submitting my first paper to the most difficult journal in the field. And Assistant Professor Fung would understand. Its studies in second language acquisition, so the journal based in the US. But the good thing is, so I received a letter from the editor, the editorial office, and I wouldn't call it rejection. I would call it guidance. They explained to me that your paper is interesting, but it is pedagogical. As a journal, we are interested in publishing theoretical papers. So they also named one journal for me. They said, okay, you try TESOL Quarterly, which is pedagogical. So it was not, I wouldn't call it rejection. It was guidance. So then I submitted the paper to TESOL Quarterly. And then again, I received guidance from that journal. They said, well, your your paper is interesting, but it is not, large enough, big enough for a research article. So we'll be happy to consider it as, there is another genre which is called research note. So if you would like to be, if you would like your paper to be considered, in that category, we can do that. Or they've also said if you want to try a different journal, maybe you can try ELT Journal by Oxford University Press. You can do that. And then I ended up sending the paper to ELT Journal by Oxford University Press. And ultimately, the paper was published from that journal. So I wouldn't call it rejection. Practically, it was rejection, but it was guidance. And working in the field now, as Professor Riddle also pointed out, I think being able to give this kind of guidance, particularly to novice researchers, people who are trying to publish for the first time. So this will be kind of a luxury these days. It's the work is overwhelming. So in our journal, so we have 3 co-editors and then the chief editor. Even then, we struggle managing all the papers that are submitted to the journal. Okay, so starting with that, and when I was thinking about the topic, the practicality issues, how we can get past the editor's desk, I was thinking how I can address this question. I thought that maybe I can bring together 3 perspectives. One is I was looking at sort of theoretical guidelines. So what sort of guidelines are available from different sources? And I came across this journal called South Asia Studies of South Asia, Journal of South Asia Studies. It's a Routledge journal. And in the section under aims and scope, they actually have clear guidelines. They say, if you want to avoid desk rejection, you have to do a few things. And they have actually included 4 specific points. And maybe I can share with you those 4 points, and then I'll bring together 2 other perspectives. So the first one is your paper within our scope? This is something that Professor Fung has already pointed out. So within the scope. So I think this is really, really important. So the scope can be understood in terms of the audience. It can be understood with reference to the discipline. And also in some cases, for certain journals, we have to think about the geographical focus. So for this journal, because it is about South Asia, if you have nothing to say about South Asia in your submission, there is no chance they wouldn't consider it. Similarly, they also have a number of disciplines, so that they talk about history, politics and international relationships, human geography, film studies. So if if your submission is not related to one of those fields, obviously it won't be taken seriously by the editor. So that's the first point, scope, thinking about the scope. Okay, and the second one is related to formatting and structuring. So it says, is your paper structured in a way that is suitable for us, for our journal? Obviously, every journal will have their own way, preferred way of structuring the material, the argument, and so on and so forth. Some journals are very rigid, other journals are more flexible. And here we can also see, questions around ontology and epistemology, for example. So all these have to be taken into account in response to this particular guideline. Is your paper structured in a way that is suitable for the journal? Okay, for me, the most important point is the third one, which is your argument the strongest it can be? And I think, more than formatting issues, more than a scope, I think this is becoming more critical because definitely authors are being smarter. They are using technology and so on and so forth. And, they don't want to have this rejection just for formatting reasons. Okay, so I think ultimately what is very, very critical is about the argument. So they will look at what is their contribution. So that's the most important point. And then finally, they also talk about checklist. Does your submission contain everything that we need? So it's kind of compliance issues, so on and so forth. So we have these four set of important points for us as authors when we think about submitting to this particular journal. And I think these guidelines are kind of generic. They apply to other journals as well. Okay, but then when I think about my own experience as an author, I can see that I am rejected very frequently. Only this month, in the month of May, I have got 3 disk rejections. And interestingly, 2 rejections from the same journal. Okay, so that also means that for some reasons, for whatever reasons, I'm actually trying to get into that particular journal. I want to publish in that journal, but unfortunately, it's not happening. Okay, the comments, from these journals for both the papers, the comments are related to scope. But of course, here, one thing that I would like to point out is, when we say scope, it's not something automatic or defining the scope or whether a particular submission fits into the scope or not. It's not a technical, it's not an objective exercise. It is an act of interpretation. The editor will make an interpretation of, whether your topic, your argument fits into what they look for. So I think we can't deny the ideological, bias, preference, or whatever of the editor. So we understand that. But definitely, the reason that I was given on both occasions from this particular journal, it was about the scope. Okay, so I can even read it from my the message that I received, the email that I received from the editor. Unfortunately, your paper is not suitable for the journal as it falls out of our aims and scope. So on one occasion, the paper that we submitted to the journal, it was what we call a narrative review of the literature on a particular topic. So the topic is not widely researched, and we thought that maybe we wouldn't come across a huge number of studies for doing a scoping review or whatever. So we ended up telling a story. And so the editor said, we only publish a scoping review. We are not interested in narrative review. Well, of course, that doesn't mean that narrative review is meaningless. So you see, in a way, the scope is also can be defined in a particular ways, in some cases very narrowly. When I think about the paper, I can't accept that, it can be rejected just because it is, it fits or doesn't fit a particular genre. It may have a, value, it may have contribution that can be understood in a, from a different angle. So you can see, and it is understandable as a co-editor myself, I can also see where the editor may be coming from, whether we acknowledge it or not. We try to get rid of as many papers as possible because you want to clear the backlog as quickly as you can. Okay, and then the third paper to another journal, and this is called Modern Language Journal. Again, Professor Fung would be familiar with this particular journal, and it's one of the toughest one. Again, I thought the paper that we had fits into their aim and scope. But the point that the editor raised was we were not engaging with the most recent conversations around that topic that were happening in that journal. Okay, so another way of understanding the relevance. Okay, so that's from that's my experience about submitting to different journals as an author. So given my frequent failure to get past the editor's desk, I'm not sure how qualified I am to talk about these issues and give advice to emerging researchers, scholars. Okay, and then the third perspective, and that is my role as a co-editor in the journal, Current Issues in Language Planning. One thing that I would like to point out about this particular journal is, it was founded by my former supervisor as a co-editor, and Professor Riddle would know him, Professor Dick Baldock. So you may have seen him around when you were doing your PhD. So this journal, it was founded in 2000, and it had a particular mission, and their aim was to support emerging novice researchers. So, so they wouldn't take rejection in a, they were not interested in rejecting papers straight away. So they were trying to support people, and I think we have maintained that tradition in this journal. So for me personally, I would try every possible way not to reject. Even then, of course, sometimes, you end up, because when you see, there is no way you can actually salvage the paper, if you like, you have to reject. So when I was looking at the rejections that I have done this month, again, I can see 3 papers. And I was trying to find out, okay, what is the reason, on what ground I did it? And I think for me, what I was looking for is the contribution. What is the contribution? What is the new thing that we are going to add? Okay, so to me, that's the most important consideration. We know there are many debates around, around the question of language, English, whether, native variety, non-native English, and so on and so forth. Those issues are there. For me personally, because I come from a non-native English speaking background, I think the most important point for me is the contribution. And when I bring together these 3 perspectives and try to come up with my own kind of personal theory of how we can get rid of the rejection, well, which is of course difficult, how we can get past the editor's desk. My theory is, if you have a good story to tell, it will be published. Maybe not in the journal that you targeted in the first place. Maybe you will find a home for the paper in another journal, if you have a good story. But of course, what is a good story? Yes, we will, sometimes, yep, and as an author, you may say that this is a good story. But of course, our definition of good can be challenged by other people, particularly the editor or reviewers. Even then, I think with some stories, with some papers, you may develop this confidence that, well, this is an important story that needs to be told. So for example, my first paper, I was kind of convinced that this is an important story that needs to be told, and I think it will be published, and it was published. Okay, so yes, I think we need to think about telling a good story, a good educational story. So that's my personal theory. And at the same time, I would say that, rejection is very common. It's hard to get past the editor's desk. But at the same time, I must point out that rejection or disrejection is not a bad thing. It's not the end of the world. There are many other journals out there. Definitely, it's very, very competitive. More and more people are trying to publish. So, it's, we can see kind of madness. Even then, when I look back at all the papers that I have written, I think almost all of them have been published in one journal or another. So I think probably from that, yeah, I can conclude with the sense of optimism that, yes, if I have a good story to tell, probably there will be a home, there will be an audience for my story. Okay, I'll stop that there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Obaid. And you have shared a lot of experiences, and we have actually had 3 questions, but I think we have covered all the questions already. And so we have got one question from the audience regarding to your sharing experience, that you mentioned that you got 3 rejections in this month, in the month of May. So one audience actually asked, how do you encourage yourself? So I think you already answered this question, because you said
Yeah.
at the end that optimism is the great thing that we can keep in mind, that we are not getting rejected from other journal, right? So yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
So
definitely. So as I said, if it is
yeah,
a good story, maybe there will be
yeah,
another journal.
yeah,
And sometimes, you can also, you can also come back to the same journal. So with another paper, so this is good news story. So I have been working on another paper for the last 2 years. So it was first submitted to the journal called World Englishes. So I got rejected from that journal, and then I shopped around, and last year I returned to this journal again, and I submitted to the journal, and it's been accepted recently. So it's a learning journey, in fact, when you are being rejected by different journals.
yes, thank you so much. Yeah, for
Great.
your
Excellent.
time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks so much. We've got a couple more questions in the chat here and just a few minutes to address them, but I want to give a chance to get some of these other voices heard. I'm going to direct the next one at Professor Riddle. You talked some about the landscape of early education researchers, some of whom had a ridiculous 100 publications. We've got some questions in the chat from Naika. How are they publishing 100 papers, and how can the rest of us possibly compete to get those grants? And this is kind of followed up by Amrita as well, who's trying to convey that, like, when some of us are giving it our all and doing things ethically and with significant effort, how can we possibly compete with people that have that CV that is the
Yeah.
length of a seasoned academic, and yet
Yeah.
we're both in the same early career pool?
So, uh, both excellent questions. Difficult to come up with a simple answer, but I guess I'd give my view on it, which is don't play that game. I didn't play that game. I never applied for a research fellowship that required 50 to 100 publications because, quite frankly, I knew I didn't have them. I was very good at not publishing while I was doing my PhD. And then my first academic job was as a lecturer with a 70% teaching load. So I didn't have much time to focus on doing that game anyway. So it became a non-starter, right? Like, why kill yourself for something that maybe you don't really want that in the first place? What I've always tried to do, and I think I'm better at it now, is I've tried to do work that I think is interesting. Like Obaid was saying, like having that story to tell of, like, well, what is it that you actually want to say? Um, and a really good friend of mine, when I was going for professor, said to me, a professor needs to profess something. Like, you actually need to stand for something. And I think as academics and as scholars, it's not just for professors, that's for all of us. Like, what is it we actually stand for? What are we trying to do? And in my humble view, the minute you outsource that work to an RA or AI or whatever to do the intellectual labor for you, it's no longer your work. You don't profess anything. You're just marketing a particular paper or research profile or whatever. And so I think there's lots of things at play, which include what kind of an academic life do you want? What kinds of outputs kind of form that story? And what kind of meaningful engagement with knowledge and and meaning making do you want to have? Um, I just wouldn't even do it. Like, when my friend was telling me about these people that are 5 years out of now, just to be clear, some people play the game. So with the ARC, you can have interruptions to your career, and there's lots of ways to kind of make them look much bigger than they might have been in real life. And so you've got people who are genuinely 10 years after they finished a PhD, but because of the rules and what have you, they can make it look like they're not. And so they've got the advantage. And then you've got folks who do work in highly competitive environments where they're from day one of their PhD, they're working on getting published. And that kind of production machinery, I think, produces a certain kind of academic. I never wanted to be that kind of academic. I still don't want to be that kind of academic. But I think we've got to acknowledge that's going on, and it's producing noise kind of in the academic world. So I think be true to yourself and think like the actual answer to how do you do it, how do you cope, is go, well, what's the end game for you? Like, are you trying to become, someone with 7,000 publications that all are variations on a theme, or are you trying to become someone that's got something meaningful to say? And then maybe a paper or two a year is actually enough to do that, because that's the paper that wins the Nobel Prize or gets the 10,000 citations or whatever, if that's the game you want to play.
That's a really, yeah, I think heartening perspective when we're just constantly exposed to hearing about those people with those great metrics. I guess it comes back down to reflecting on what kind of person we want to be when we enter this industry, and what kind of position we want to represent. And you're right about a professor needs to profess something, and I think it starts with ethical standards as well. So I think that's a really great answer. I would like to do one more follow-up question. This one's for me, actually. This one's for Professor Fung. When you're thinking about selecting journals, you talked about making sure that it aligns with the audience and things like that. What is your method for doing that? Are you reading the journal's About Me page, or are you taking a look at what kind of publications have been previously published? What kind of tip can you give us for making sure that we're getting the right information about the journal?
Thank you very much, Tim. Actually, I also wanted to respond very quickly to the previous comments. I actually struggled in this game as well. I mean, like, because I'm still I'm now in my third year in tenure, and so still trying to get more published, but at the same time, more quality work. And I just want to add one more note in response to Professor Riddle and Professor Hamid's points, is I remember somebody also told me earlier that where to put my flag. I mean, like, in terms of the area that I want to be known about. Yeah. So I think, to me, I think it doesn't make a huge difference if I have 5 very good papers in the same field, as opposed to somebody having 30 papers not very different from each other and then like in the same field. I mean, if the quality is good enough. So I keep on trying to encourage myself, yeah, to try to publish more quality work if possible. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, with the acknowledging that the field is like that. Yeah. So coming back to this question, I think I look at the journal introduction page very often. Yeah, so to look at the scope, and also actually when I do my literature review, I think I already get a hunch of what journals might be more relevant for my manuscripts to be written. And because when I do my literature review, I would see that, oh, these few journals often publish something that is related to what what story I'm telling, and I think this is something I would look for. And then when I draft my manuscripts, I would pay attention to some of these journals. I do also have a list of journals that I always aspire to publish in. Some of those were what Professor Hamid mentioned earlier about like modern language journals and other things. But I think yeah, I do have a list that I would want to try, because most often the work that I've been doing is related to these fields. And so I think it's something that we could ask ourselves, like when we do literature review, when we try to read the literature in the field that we are working in, like what are some of the most major journals that we are engaging with. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that response and for responding to both of those questions. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I think we could have listened to all 3 of your perspectives for quite a lot longer. So I just want to say a huge thank you to our 3 speakers, Professor Riddle, Associate Professor Hamid, and Assistant Professor Fung, for offering both your time and your really critical and fantastic insights for us today. It's given us plenty to reflect on for our own research and academic practice and lives, really. So thank you also to all of those attendees that engaged and provided such rich questions. Before we close, we just wanted to, again, tell us who we are. This event was organised by the U21 Graduate Research in Education Community of Practice. My name's Laura, and I'm joined by my colleagues today, Lorna, Rabiul, Aaron, Tim, and Sanskriti, all on the leadership team. And our goal in this group is to provide a space for postgraduate researchers across the global network of U21 institutions and beyond, really, to learn, collaborate, and navigate challenges in higher education. We're asking that you please take a moment, if you can, to leave some feedback for us by scanning the QR code there. And this feedback will help us in achieving that goal and to design more upcoming events for you and for postgraduate researchers in the field. And you can keep up to date with our community's activities on our LinkedIn page, which we encourage you to follow as well. And really just thank you again to our speakers and to all of you for joining us today. We really hope to see you at the next U21 GRE COP event, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.